It was 2:47 a.m. when Ibrahim Traoré's phone rang. The number was blocked. If you want your family back, you have 24 hours. One condition: cancel the Chinese deal, or you'll never see them again, the voice said. After hanging up, Traoré looked out his office window and saw a red laser dot aimed at his chest from the opposite building. That's when he realized this wasn't just a fight for his family. It was his final battle for survival. But Traoré had a plan. Burkina Faso's young leader Ibrahim Traoré was reviewing the final details of an $8 billion infrastructure deal to be signed with China that night. This agreement was the largest investment his country had ever seen in its history. Roads, hospitals, schools, power plants, everything needed to modernize Burkina Faso was in this deal. However, this agreement was making certain powers uncomfortable, because if this deal was signed, Burkina Faso would no longer depend on Western countries. It would stand on its own feet. While Traoré was working at his desk, his phone rang and the most terrifying 2 minutes of his life began. "Hello, Ibrahim," the voice had said, very calm but ice-cold at the same time. "I hope your family is well." Traoré's heart began to stop. "Who are you? What do you want?" "You're a very smart man, Ibrahim, but sometimes smart people make wrong choices. The agreement you're signing tomorrow is a wrong choice." "Which agreement are you talking about?" Traoré was trying to buy time. "The Chinese deal. You're going to cancel that agreement, and you're going to do it within 24 hours. What if I don't?" The voice laughed coldly. "Then you'll never see your family again." Traoré's blood froze. "What do you mean by family?" "I mean your mother, Fatoumata Traoré, your sister Aminata, your brother Ousmane, and of course your beloved daughter Mariam. They're all in a safe place now. Of course, they'll stay safe as long as you make the right decision." When Traoré hung up the phone, his hands were trembling. He immediately called his security chief, General Amadou Sangaré. "General, we have an emergency. Check on my family." "Sir, what happened?" "Try to contact my family immediately. Call all of them." 10 minutes later, General Sangaré returned. His face was pale. "Mr. President, we can't reach any of them. I sent a security team to your mother's house. The house is empty. Their cars are in the garage, their phones are at home. But they're gone." Traoré's world shook. But as a leader, he had to stay calm. "General, this information must remain absolutely confidential. No one will know. Now, what do I have at hand?" "Mr. President, 24 hours is a very short time. We don't know who they are, we don't know where they are. Our only clue is that phone call." Traoré walked to the window. The red laser light was still coming from the opposite building. So they hadn't just made a phone call, they were watching him too. "General, surround that opposite building. But be careful. If anyone gets caught there, they might kill my family." Traoré returned to his desk and began to think. Who could it be? Who was this bothered by the Chinese deal? At that moment, his assistant Fatou Konate entered. "Mr. President, there's an urgent message from the French ambassador. He wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. He says they have important matters to discuss about the Chinese deal." A lightning bolt struck Traoré's mind. The French ambassador. The timing was very strange. "Fatou, when did we receive this meeting request?" "About 3 hours ago, sir." So before his family was kidnapped. Very suspicious. When Traoré was alone with his security chief, he said, "General, I'm going to tell you something, but this must absolutely stay between us. My family has been kidnapped. If I don't cancel the Chinese deal within 24 hours, they'll kill them." General Sangaré was shocked. This is an open threat. Let's immediately cancel the Chinese delegation." "No," Traoré said with determination. "If I do what they want, I lose not just for my family, but for 20 million Burkinabe. This deal is our country's future." "But sir." "General, I'm going to save my family and sign the agreement. I won't choose between the two." "How is this possible?" Traoré smiled. "Because they made a mistake. They underestimated me." At 6 a.m., Traoré gathered his team. Security chief, intelligence director, special forces commander, and his loyal assistant Fatou. "Friends, no one outside this room will know, but my family has been kidnapped. 18 hours remain. Here's our plan." Traoré drew a map on the board. First step, find out who they are. Intelligence Director Mariama, analyze all phone traffic from last night. Where is that laser light coming from? Intelligence Director Mariama Ouedraogo answered, "Mr. President, the old ITC building. It's been empty for 6 months." "Good. I want all security camera recordings from around there. The last 48 hours of recordings. Second step, what do they think my plan is? The Chinese delegation arrives at 3 p.m. The agreement will be signed at 5 p.m. They'll force me to cancel at the last minute. Third step, while I wait for them, you'll search for my family. Special Forces Commander Yusuf Sawadogo asked, Mr. President, how can we find them without clues? Traoré smiled. There is a clue. They made a mistake. What mistake? They knew my mother's name. They knew my sister's name. But they called my daughter Mariam. Everyone was surprised. What do you mean? I don't have a daughter. I'm unmarried. Mariam is my cousin. She lives with my grandmother. So they didn't do complete research. They got my family tree wrong. Fatu understood. So they're actually amateurs. Exactly. If they were professionals, they wouldn't have made this mistake. And if they're amateurs, they're most likely locals. At 10 a.m., Mariama came running. Mr. President, we found them. 3 vehicles are seen in security cameras. They entered the ITC building the night before at 11:30 p.m. And most importantly, one of the cars is familiar. Former Interior Minister Laurent Zongo's car. Traoré was shocked. Laurent Zongo was the minister he had dismissed 2 years ago, because it was revealed that he was making secret deals with French companies. So it's Laurent's revenge. But he's not alone. Who's supporting him? Mr. President, one of the cars has diplomatic plates. Which country? France. Now everything was becoming clear. Laurent Zongo was working with French intelligence. Traoré put his plan into action. Special forces dispersed to 3 different points. 1. Around the ITC building. 2. Laurent Zongo's house. 3. Around the French consulate at 2 p.m., 1 hour before the Chinese delegation arrived. Traoré's phone rang again. Ibrahim, your time is running out. Cancel the Chinese delegation. Where is my family? In a safe place. But how much longer they stay safe depends on you. Laurent, Traoré said. Is it you? There was silence on the other side. Yes, Laurent, I recognized your voice. And your French friends are with you too. Ibrahim, you're very smart, but this time you're going to lose. We'll see, Laurent. We'll see. At that moment, General Sangaré whispered in Traoré's ear, found them. Laurent's old farm in the rural area. Thermal cameras show 7 people. Traoré smiled. Laurent, I'm giving you one last chance. Release my family and run away. Impossible. Then get ready. At 2:30 p.m., special forces moved into action. They quietly approached Laurent's farm. Inside were 3 kidnappers and 4 hostages. At the same time, Traoré was preparing to welcome the Chinese delegation. No one knew his family had been kidnapped. At 2:45 p.m., the operation began. Special forces surrounded the farm from 3 directions. Laurent and the French agents drew their weapons, but it was already too late. After a brief 15-minute clash, all kidnappers were captured. Traoré's family was rescued safe and sound. Just then, the Chinese delegation arrived at the palace. At 5 p.m., exactly as scheduled, Ibrahim Traoré and the Chinese delegation signed the $8 billion agreement. No one knew about the drama that had been unfolding since morning. Immediately after the signing ceremony, Traoré made a statement to the press. My dear people, today is a historic day for our country. But at the same time, it's a day when certain forces tried to stop us. This morning my family was kidnapped. The aim was to make me cancel this agreement. The media was shocked. But as you can see, neither my family was harmed nor our country's interests. Because the people of Burkina Faso can no longer be threatened or intimidated. We write our own destiny. That evening, as investigations continued, Intelligence Director Mariama Ouedraogo made a shocking discovery in Laurent Zongo's communications. Mr. President, we've found Laurent's contact records with French intelligence. This operation has been planned for 6 months. 6 months. Traoré was surprised. Yes, sir. They've been monitoring your every move since you started negotiations with China. They knew about every meeting, every detail of the agreement. How? Laurent had been feeding them information through a network of contacts in various ministries. But there's more, sir. Mariama showed Traoré encrypted emails on her tablet. According to these communications, this wasn't just about the Chinese deal. France was planning a complete regime change operation. Laurent was supposed to replace you after forcing you to resign in disgrace. Traoré studied the documents carefully. The scope of the conspiracy was bigger than he had imagined. They had a three-phase plan, Mariama continued. Phase 1, discredit your government through the family kidnapping. Phase 2, force you to cancel the Chinese deal, making you appear weak and unreliable. Phase 3, Laurent announces his candidacy with French backing, promising to restore stability and traditional partnerships. Sophisticated, Traoré admitted, but they made two critical errors. Which ones, sir? First, they underestimated our intelligence capabilities. Second, they overestimated Laurent's popularity with our people. As the investigation deepened over the following weeks, the true scope of the French operation became even more alarming. General Sangaré briefed Traoré on additional discoveries. Mr. President, we've uncovered evidence that this wasn't just a Burkina Faso operation. French intelligence has been running similar schemes across West Africa. Traoré leaned forward in his chair. Explain. In Mali, they've been supporting certain military officers who oppose Chinese investment in lithium mining. In Niger, they've been funding opposition groups critical of uranium deals with alternative partners. The pattern is identical everywhere. A coordinated campaign to maintain economic control, Traoré concluded. Exactly. And Laurent wasn't their only asset in Burkina Faso. We've identified at least 12 other individuals who have been receiving payments from French intelligence over the past 3 years. The revelation was staggering. Traoré realized that the kidnapping plot was just the tip of an iceberg of foreign interference that stretched across multiple countries and institutions. General, I want a complete audit of everyone with access to sensitive government information, and I want this information shared with our partners in Mali, Niger, and Guinea. If France is running this operation regionally, our response must be regional too. During Laurent Zongo's interrogation, disturbing details emerged about the psychological tactics French intelligence had employed. They didn't just recruit me with money, Laurent admitted during his confession. They studied my psychology, my grievances, my ambitions. They knew exactly how to manipulate me. The interrogator, Colonel Sawadogo, pressed for details. What kind of psychological profiling? They knew I resented being dismissed from the Interior Ministry. They fed that resentment, convinced me that Traoré was leading the country to ruin with his anti-Western policies. They made me believe I was saving Burkina Faso, not betraying it. And the family kidnapping? Whose idea was that?
Laurent S. face Darkened.
That was their escalation. My French handler, Agent Michel Dubois, said that African leaders only understand force. He said Traoré would never sacrifice his family for political principles. But they were wrong. They completely misunderstood him. They thought because he's young, he'd be easily intimidated. They didn't realize that his youth gives him strength, not weakness. The Special Forces operation to rescue Traoré's family was more complex than initially reported. Captain Yusuf Ouedraogo, who led the assault team, provided a detailed account to military intelligence. We approached the farm from 3 directions at exactly 2:30 p.m., Captain Ouedraogo reported. Thermal imaging showed 7 heat signatures inside the main building, 3 kidnappers, and 4 hostages. What about resistance? Laurent Zongo was the most dangerous. He was armed with a military-grade assault rifle and had positioned himself near the hostages. The 2 French agents were professionals, but they seemed surprised by our rapid response. How did you neutralize the threat without harming the hostages? We used flashbang grenades to disorient them, then moved in with non-lethal weapons first. The key was simultaneous entry from all 3 points. They couldn't coordinate their defense. The rescue operation lasted exactly 17 minutes from initial breach to full securing of all hostages. No one was injured, a testament to the professionalism of Burkina Faso's special forces. The psychological impact on Traoré's family was significant. His mother, Fatoumata, later described their ordeal to a family counselor. They kept us blindfolded most of the time, she recounted, but we could hear them talking. Laurent kept saying this was for the good of Burkina Faso, that Ibrahim was making dangerous mistakes. What was the worst moment? The counselor asked. When they showed us news reports about the Chinese delegation arriving. Laurent said if Ibrahim signed the agreement, we would never go home. That's when I feared my son might sacrifice the country's future for us. And what gave you hope? I know my son. He doesn't make choices between family and country. He finds a way to protect both. That's who he is. The kidnapping plot sent shockwaves through international diplomatic circles. The Chinese Foreign Ministry issued a strongly worded statement condemning foreign interference in sovereign nations' domestic affairs. The attempted coercion of President Traoré through family kidnapping represents a new low in international relations, the Chinese statement read. China stands firmly with Burkina Faso's right to choose its own development partners. The African Union convened an emergency session to address the broader implications. AU Commission Chairperson Moussa Faki Mahamat addressed the assembly. What happened in Burkina Faso is an attack on African sovereignty itself. When external forces resort to kidnapping family members to influence policy decisions, they cross every line of civilized international conduct. The EU, embarrassed by the French involvement, issued a carefully worded statement distancing itself from any unauthorized activities by member state intelligence services. Russia and Turkey both offered enhanced security cooperation to Burkina Faso, seeing an opportunity to expand their influence in West Africa. French media outlets initially tried to spin the story as an internal Burkina Faso political dispute. Le Figaro ran a headline reading "Political violence erupts in Burkina Faso" without mentioning French involvement. However, when Traoré released audio recordings of the threatening phone calls and evidence of French intelligence participation, the narrative became impossible to maintain. The truth has a way of emerging, Traoré told international journalists. You can control the initial story, but you cannot control the facts forever. Social media played a crucial role in spreading the real story. The hashtag Burkina Faso Truth trended globally as African diaspora communities shared evidence of French involvement. France's response to the failed kidnapping plot was swift economic warfare. French banks froze Burkina Faso government accounts, and French companies began withdrawing from existing contracts. They're showing their true colors, Traoré told his economic team. When political manipulation fails, they resort to economic blackmail. However, this heavy-handed response backfired. Other African nations, seeing how France punished Burkina Faso for resisting manipulation, began quietly diversifying their own economic partnerships. China, Russia, and Turkey all announced increased investment in Burkina Faso as a direct response to Western economic pressure. In his final statement before sentencing, Laurent Zongo provided perhaps the most revealing insight into the mindset behind such betrayals. I convinced myself I was saving Burkina Faso from Chinese debt colonialism, he said to the court, but I realize now that I was actually perpetuating French economic colonialism. The difference is that Chinese partnerships, at least, are negotiated between equals. Do you regret your actions? The judge asked. I regret everything, but most of all, I regret that it took betraying my own country for me to understand what sovereignty really means. 1 year after the 24-hour crisis, Burkina Faso had transformed dramatically. The Chinese infrastructure projects were ahead of schedule, creating thousands of jobs for Burkinabe workers. More importantly, the country had become a model for other African nations seeking to resist foreign manipulation. Traoré established the Ouagadougou Institute for African Sovereignty, which trained intelligence officers from across the continent in counterinterference techniques. What we learned in those 24 hours, Traoré explained to African leaders visiting the institute, is that sovereignty isn't just about political independence. It's about having the strength to resist all forms of coercion, economic, political, and personal. Psychologists who studied the case identified key factors that enabled Traoré to resist the psychological pressure of the kidnapping plot. Dr. Aminata Tall, a Senegalese psychologist who interviewed Traoré, noted, most leaders, faced with threats to their family, experience what we call tunnel vision. They can only see the immediate choice between family and duty. President Traoré demonstrated panoramic thinking. He refused to accept that these were his only options. What enabled this different thinking? A colleague asked. 2 factors. His genuine belief in collective responsibility, that his duty to 20 million Burkinabe was as sacred as his duty to his family, and his practical experience as a military strategist, which taught him that seemingly impossible situations often have creative solutions. The investigation revealed that Laurent had been recruited by French intelligence service DGSE 2 years ago, shortly after his dismissal from the Interior Ministry. His handlers had promised him the presidency in exchange for sabotaging Burkina Faso's efforts to diversify its international partnerships. The French were particularly concerned about the precedent, General Sangaré reported during a security briefing. If Burkina Faso successfully partnered with China for major infrastructure development, other West African nations might